So since there's a whole bunch of new people, I'm going to say what I said earlier again. Three things to keep in mind. One, I do not have a wireless mic, so there are points during the presentation that I am looking to you, the audience, for information and sharing. So if there is something that you want to share, please raise your hand. If I call on you, please come on up this way, because we have to have you talk to the mics up here, because I just don't have a wireless mic. The second thing is, if you need to take a break, please feel free to do so. If you need to leave for whatever reason, the doors will be closed at a certain point as soon as I start, but you are able to leave. I'm not holding nobody hostage or against your will. That is not a MAGFest principle, nor a therapist principle. The third thing was, if you can't hear me, please let me know. The reason the mics exist is for accessibility, and then I was also going to just remind people this panel is being recorded. However, it's not on any of you as the panel, or as the people in the room for the panel. As the camera is in the corner, in case you're wondering, it's pointed this direction. The reason it's being recorded is so that other people can hear the same content and the same conversation that you're here for. So we want to be able to help other people who might not be at MAGFest have access to that information. Not all the panels are recorded, some are, some aren't, but very excited that this one is, so other people can be a part of the conversation. Yes?
Once it's recorded, where's it posted?
YouTube. If you type in MAGFest, it take a minute. There's a lot of panels, right? But it took I think 6 months for them to get it up last year. So like a panel I did last year is also up. This one will also be up. So, but not just this one, but like a lot of the different panels from the weekend. If you miss something and you want to see, you can just type MAGFest and then the year, and then once they're posted, they should have them available. That's a good question. Oh, hello. Y'all, there's some seats up front, some seats in the back, some seats in the middle.
So what was the panel called that you did last year?
What was that?
What was the panel called that you did
The panel that I did last year was called Mental Health and Gaming. And it was with myself and a co-panelist. I recognize some of y'all from last year. So I'm glad to see some familiar faces. That panel was done with myself, and then my co-panelist is Wandering Chaos, who is an esports gamer, but a person of color as well. So you can check him out too. But that panel's available too. Okay. Well, it's 12:29. People are still going to trickle in. I'm going to let them handle crowd control, and we'll kind of jump in. If I go like this, that just means push down so that people can see. Sound good? Can everybody hear me? Put thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Everybody. Y'all awesome. Well, thank you for coming to my panel. I'm really glad that all of y'all are here. My name is AC Mateen. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm so excited to do this panel with all of you all. I just want to do a few disclaimers. I'm a therapist, yes, but I am a MAGFest attendee. I'm a therapist, but I'm not your therapist. Okay. Second disclaimer. This is a huge conversation, and this presentation is only 1 hour. It is only one part of a larger conversation. We will not have time to tackle every single thing, nor will I be able to tell you all of the game examples, all the character examples, this, that, or whatever, okay? I ask that you bear with me. I only have a few that I'm going to be able to cover in the time that I've been given, which I really appreciate, and I really hope that you'll be open to that conversation. This is not this is just my clinical opinion. That doesn't mean you can take it, you can leave it. That doesn't mean that there's any value less than you if you have a difference in opinion, okay? I also want to say that because what we're not going to do is tear down other people who might have a different perspective or might see things differently or might attach to a character that I might talk about or a game I might talk about, okay? Can we all do that? Be respectful?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Are you looking for a seat? There's a few. Okay, cool. All right. So I'm going to jump in. Obviously, like I said, there'll be a part for Q&A. I'm not going to be able to answer everybody's questions either, but I will try to get through as many as I can, okay? Cool. Let's jump in. So I already told you, I'm a licensed mental health therapist. I am licensed in, not DC, I wish, that'd be so cool, but I am licensed on the other side, so Washington State in Seattle. I'm working on licensure in Illinois because I live in Chicago right now, so you can be dual crossed. I'm not gonna talk about that too much, but that's what that is. The reason I did this panel is because I love gaming so much. You can catch me with so many different types of consoles, and PC. But I'm also really passionate about mental health, not just because I'm a therapist, but also because I, as a person who has a diagnosis myself, really wants to create content at MAGFest, but also other conventions to be able to help people feel safe and have a place where they can feel like they can get access to information. So at 16, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. At 23, I was diagnosed with ADHD. I am a walking product of help and love and gaming. And I think it's really important to take the things we love and talk about them and talk about the good things that they do right, but also critique them a little bit, right? Because there's always room for improvement and always room to do better. So on the development side, there's definitely a lot of room to improve. On the creator side, also a lot of room to improve, but sometimes on the user side as well, and we'll talk about those things and have that conversation, okay? Any questions about me before I continue? Okay, so I'm gonna show you some images. Y'all probably gonna know who most of them are. I want y'all to raise your hand if you have a word that describes one of the characters. Tell me which character in just a word. The first word that comes to your head is fine. There's a reason why I'm asking, but I'm not gonna tell you that reason, obviously. Sound good? One of them is not a person, it is a place. Okay? Cool. Hands, thoughts.
Asylum.
Okay. Well. Ooh, wait. Ooh. Y'all can shout them out too. That's fine too. No, you're good. Go ahead. Sadistic. Which one? Who are you talking about?
Joker.
Ooh, okay. And then I heard somebody say something before this person said sadistic. What'd you say? I didn't hear it, so no. Okay. Blue shirt. Go ahead.
Duality.
Okay. In the far back, you raising your hand like this. You can shout it.
Insane.
Which one?
Most of them.
Okay.
Creative.
Creative. Who you talking about?
I can't. Tiny Tina.
Okay. Also in the far back, I see your hand. Go ahead. Okay. Anybody else? Black shirt. I see you raise your hand. I can't see your face. I'm sorry.
Quirky.
Which one?
Tiny Tina.
Okay. Any other words that come to mind? Go ahead. Which one?
Which one isn't it?
Ooh. What if I told you that the way that you're describing those characters is problematic? Where do we learn those type of words to describe these characters?
Media.
Media is a big part. Anywhere else? DSM? We'll talk about that because I'll argue with you on the DSM. What version of the DSM are you using? Okay, so you guys know. But even as a therapist, that goes so far as to if I'm using these type of words to describe patients or characters, that's wrong, right? It's labeling, it's stigmatizing, it limits their background, their stories, even though these aren't real people, right? But that's what we have been ingrained to view them as, right? So what ends up happening is we also forget, or we know, but we kind of still hold on to those labels. It's usually a lack of understanding. But, for example, an asylum, and we'll talk more about this, but it leads into some harmful stereotypes, tropes, and even and nobody's wrong, I just want to say, for raising their hand and shouting what they think. I just want to make that very clear. But this is the reason why I had you do it, because you're not alone. Even I've done it as a person, right? And so today's panel is to attempt to change that narrative, or add to that narrative, and in a better way. Maybe we can't change that the Joker was called the Joker, or we can't change the things that he did. We can't change that Tiny Tina is labeled a certain way in certain cases, but maybe we can be more mindful when we talk about her. Maybe we can be more aware of the things that she goes through, right? Those type of things. Be more sensitive to all of these characters. And we'll talk about those tropes, and I want you to try to remember these characters, because they all fall into a trope. Talk about them. Like I said it before, I don't have the ability to talk about everybody. Yes?
Is it problematic that a lot of Batman characters and themes tend to end up on these types of lists?
Can. We'll talk about it, because we'll talk about the story, like how it got there. Yes?
Well, like with the Joker, like, he killed a lot of people, so is it like, I guess, like, problematic, or is it like, we can treat him with compassion, but we can also, like, look at the fact that he's killed people?
I think you just answer your question. Right? Just because somebody has a mental illness doesn't always mean that they're perpetually violent, right? Doesn't mean that they're going to go out and kill someone or end their life or blow someone up or, in Joker's case, hurt their girlfriend, DV type stuff, right? Kills his family, right? Holds criminals, doesn't take care of them, that type of thing, right? And these are just a few that I pulled. There's many more. I had like 3 slides, but I think y'all get the point after one, right? Any other thoughts? Go ahead.
Are we focusing on the original, or things on the original Silent Hill or Silent Hill 2 remake? There's slightly different stories.
There is. Talk more about that. How is it different?
Presentation is a little bit different in the remake. Where
Correct. So,
the original,
talking about the difference between the original Silent Hill and the remake.
You mean the original, the first game?
Yeah, the original Silent Hill. The original
Yeah.
Silent Hill and the remake.
Yep,
There's slight differences in the story and how James presented both stories.
there is. But there's not differences in the fact that he still struggled, right? There's not differences in the fact that there's still some aspects of mental illness that exist, right? That doesn't change. And I'm not saying that any of these characters are bad. I'm not saying they're inherently good. I'm just saying the way that we describe them and we understand their stories and the things that they go through matters. Just like in real life, when people who have mental illness exist, the way that we talk about it matters. The way that we understand their stories matters. Does that make sense? All right, let's keep going. So these are the topics that we're going to cover today. Again, like I said before, it's not all of them. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the situation. Why does it matter? Portrayals over time. Some of the stereotypes and certain tropes. And then I'm going to talk about a few games. I don't want to say get it right, but do a little bit better at creating a storyline, and I'll tell you why. And if y'all want to share your experiences, whether it's for those games that I'm going to talk about, or if you have other examples, that's when a good time to come up would be, because I really want people to be able to hear. We'll talk about the impact of representation. What are the challenges? Because even though we're asking, not just for developers, this talks about developers, but, just the industry in general, what are the challenges that they face? How can we ask them to change or do better if we don't know what they face, right? And then how can we, as the users of games or, fandoms, whatever it may be, help to change the narrative? And then just the key takeaway points. I'll end there, okay? Sound good? Cool. And thanks, y'all, for bearing with me. Okay, so what's the situation? So since 2002, there's research that goes back even farther, but I just went from like early 2000s to now. Video game consumption's obviously increased. More people are playing them. And that's for a number of reasons. Sometimes that's because of the hype, that's promotion, that's effects of media, it's the overlap between Asian consumption and Americanized, westernized media. Like, there's a lot of different reasons why that's the case. Doesn't mean it's bad, it's just a fact. However, the issue is that very little attention is paid to how these games have shown mental illnesses and diagnoses, and that was definitely prevalent 30s, 40s, 50s, etc. But it's still prevalent. It's still an issue now. Okay. In a study done by researchers from Frontier Psychiatry, they explored best-selling video games from 1998 all the way to 2024 to analyze representations, and this is what they found. They found that 1 in 10 games that are developed and created, and this is a global scale, not just a US scale, portray symptoms of mental illness in a diagnosis, or sometimes it might be like a symbolic where they use like a symbol to represent it. But it's either in a character, a storyline, a symbol, something like that. And then of those games, 75% of the ones that they covered portrayed mental illness in a negative light. That's a huge portion that are utilizing something like this, and it's negative, or they can find something negative with it. Now, I will say some people might view that as nitpicking, but that's their job in terms of research, is to nitpick and find patterns and things. So take that as you will. Now, the researchers that are available in the study, 4 of them are psychologists, 2 of them are psychiatrists, and then 1 of them is just a mental health therapist like me, somebody who just has a master's degree. So they're all professionals within the field. There is some bias towards the research that happens in every research study, but it is worth taking a look at if you're interested. But I will say that, give me 1 second, that despite these negatives, that there's still growing positives that we're going to talk about as well, okay? Hold on 1 second. Blue shirt, you raised your hand. Yep.
Yeah, so when you mean negative light, do you mean exclusively like what we would assume the definition of negative to be, or does that also account for depictions that might be seen as patronizing?
So the research study itself covers depictions, but it's more focused on specific instances when mental illness, whether it's depicted or how it can be seen to the user or to like the fan base, and it's being consumed, is explored. So it would be both of those. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
You raised your hand up front.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I had a very similar question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the study was global.
Yeah.
Did that include negative connotation within the culture that developers and storyline came from?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So they were asking, in terms of the research study, like what does it consist of? And it consists of depictions, and then it consists of specific examples within symbols, characters, storylines, okay? So it's both. It is global, however, it's still limited because it only covers a certain number of games. And in this particular study, they only covered 5,000 games worldwide. So that's still not big when you think about how many games are produced worldwide. Make sense to everyone? Cool. Okay. So this is why it matters. Within the United States, these numbers come from, not from the study, just to let you know. So 1 in 5 adults, 1 in 7 kids, 1 in 7 adolescents have symptoms of mental illness or a diagnosis of some kind. It is something that deserves awareness to be brought to. My role as a therapist is often to break the stigma, right? That's literally what our job is. However, in a general sense, my hope is as the general public, we can begin to break the stigma behind talking about it and understanding it more, and understanding the negative tropes that may impact these types of games. When characters and storylines are created in more realistic ways and become less harmful, or if they're made with a sense of awareness and respect, more people can identify and relate to those experiences, and it becomes easier to consume for everyone. Change in the industry matters. And so when we focus with more awareness and acceptance, the voices of those who need to be heard comes out. Okay? Any questions? No. So the next slide is going to be talking about portrayal over time. It is going to talk about some of those images that you saw at the beginning. In a general sense, I'm not going to be like the Joker, blah, 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 but like in a general sense. There's a reason why I'm not talking about pre-1970s, and the reason why that is because in general, between 1900 and 1960, games weren't as fully developed at that point. Two, there was a general lack of understanding for a lot of things during that time frame. I'm not saying it was magically better or whatever, but it wasn't as pertinent until the late 70s. And so that's why I'm covering from that time period to now. Okay? Cool. Can everybody see that okay? Cool. From the 1970s to the late 1980s, developers, not all, but many focus on the entertainment aspect of how many people can this reach and how many people are going to watch it and play it. And so their ideas for games and characters were often based on broad societal attitudes that they witnessed or like were the norm at the time. And so an example of this is there was a game that came out, it's called Manic Mansion. There's a character, Dr. Fred Edison, who follows like the mad scientist trope that was introduced that was very popular and prominent during this time. And he was portrayed as like eclectic, eccentric, mentally unstable, but a lot of people consumed the game. So within the year that it was produced, 3.6 million people had either played it or played it with a friend. So it like exceeded their numbers that they thought during that time. That might seem low compared to today's games, but that was like very popular for that time. Okay? A lot of, not all, when I say these things, I'm not saying all games, or all developers, but this became kind of like the trope where they depicted mental illness as synonymous with like the concept of evil, of someone who's evil is always mentally ill, someone who's evil is always bad, right? So it became those absolutes started. Then we kind of shift from that to the 1980s, like late 1980s through the mid 1990s. There was increased exploration over horror and the genre of horror, increased portrayal of mental institutions like the asylum, Arkham, for example, or not even just Arkham, but abandoned buildings in general that created places of horror that some filled like cultural misunderstandings and stigmas. They begin to cross over cultural understandings of like ghosts and death and life after death, big concepts like that, and combine them within that genre at the time. And what came out of that, I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but for some of the games, what came out of that is the stigma of like, this is always how we have to do things, or a lack of understanding of like, why do these symbols or these things exist to that culture in that way. So a lot of people were kind of aware, kind of sensitive during this time, tried to bring it up, but a lot of times it was shut down. There was actually a movement because there was a lot of, at this time there was a game that came out and then it was taken away. It was called Sembaba, and it was like a Russian crossover game that came out, and it was produced in the United States, and then it was immediately taken away because it used Vietnam and concepts of Vietnamese culture and impacted that horror genre at the time. So they made those symbols within that culture to be synonymous with like mental illness when it meant something completely different. So that's just an example, but it did come out in the United States with a lack of understanding. But then the mid 1990s to the early 2000s, there was more of that growing awareness of the need for distinctive depictions and like really honing in on like, this is an issue, this is something that we need to be more careful with, and we need to kind of get the message out. And so developers begin to see that mental illness wasn't cut or dry, it was more complex, and it needed a much lengthier conversation. So thus it began this like wheels turning of like, hey, something's different, has gotta shift. It wasn't perfect, but it began those conversations. In the late 20s to now, a lot of people understand games with a sense of empathy, advocacy, and realism. Their experiences of people who have said diagnoses or said mental illnesses, they really want to see the shift of like being consulted, for example, saying, hey, I'm a person that lives this every day, here's some feedback, that type of thing. So this is kind of what the push is right now. Any questions? Oh, sorry, I know I keep asking, but I know that this is a lot of information, and I just want to make sure I'm taking the time to slow down, and if people have questions, be able to answer some. No? Okay. The next slide is going to be talking about some of those tropes and stereotypes. Goes back to what we did, the activity we did at the beginning. We'll talk more about that, okay? So these are some of the most common stereotypes within games, and not necessarily in any specific genre, but just in general, okay? The crazy, sometimes it's the crazy villain, but usually it's when crazy is implemented. If you've played Animal Crossing, Crazy Red. It's simple, something as simple as that to something as, to the way we flip cards and we do tabletop games. It's important to understand. So the crazy for this specific trope is usually an antagonist, not always, but it can be a main character who's portrayed as insane, who has or displays erratic behavior. And somebody asked about this earlier, that's why I'm talking about it, but who has over-the-top actions, sometimes has violent tendencies, and a lot of you mentioned at the beginning, right, you said insane, unstable, right, that type of thing, when you saw the Joker and Two-Face, that type of stuff. So that's where a lot of these tropes have kind of funneled in, and that'd be a trope, for example, that Joker would fall into, okay? The haunted hero, the anti-hero, is often a character who is burdened by guilt, trauma, or depression. It can be a wide range of things. Sometimes it's anxiety. But the struggles of the characters can be used as a plot device rather than being explored meaningfully. It's like, oh, here you go. Here's the character's trauma, and we're not going to tell you any more about it. That's it. This is all they go through. The end. You know what I mean? Without any further development of like, okay, well, you just unloaded to all of us as the people who are playing the game of like, so-and-so's daughter died and also is going down this path, but like, why? What significance does that have? So you kind of just leave it without any meaningful explanation or reason as to why. The asylum that I mentioned before is considered a stereotype, not itself, but the meaning of it. It's often, like I mentioned earlier, it's scary, it plays on fear, it can perpetuate places that people go to for care, such as a mental health facility or inpatient facility, that type of thing. The split personality trope, Two-Face, fits that trope. Oftentimes, diagnoses like DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, give me 1 second, I see your hand raised, isn't accurately represented. And so a lot of times, Moon Knight is another example, within video games, but also media, where DID is supposed to be shown, but it's not shown completely accurately to the experiences. Split is another example of that trope, even though it's not a video game. Felt like it was relevant to bring up. I'll stop here before I talk about the other two. Yes?
There's one example of the game fumbling dissociative identity disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Ace Attorney series, which has like a 50-50 track record, in my opinion, in doing mental health right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
One of the cases actually deals with someone who has it, and it's like the Hollywood version where it's like not quite right. And like, I was just kind of like, yeah, that's not how that works, but yeah, it's weird. Like sometimes it will actually portray like whoever has illness will portray it correctly, and it like makes sense, and you're like, oh, like you're doing good. And then other times they're just like, oh, people switch personalities, and I'm like, oh, more. Just a big example. It's in the 6th game, I think, 3rd or 4th case.
Can you say the title one more time so I can repeat it for other people to hear?
Ace Attorney, Spirit of Justice.
Ace Attorney, Spirit of Justice is what they are talking about. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I see your hand raised in the back. Go ahead. Do you want to come up here and share the example? Or you want?
Example I can think of that portrays this in a way that is pretty accurate. It's an older game called Xenogears.
Okay. Yep.
Xenogears has dissociative identity disorder.
Yep.
Which is brought forth by a traumatic incident in his childhood. It's basically a defense mechanism from the traumatic stuff he's going through at the time. I actually think that the trophy, we have the smart character on the cast actually straight up calls it dissociative identity disorder in the script.
Yep. That's good to hear. It's good that there are games out there, even older ones, that are accurately portraying it, because it's still one today that a lot of times isn't. The redemption through sacrifice is a character with mental illness or who has a diagnosis or experiences a trauma, because it's not always either or what, who only finds redemption through self-sacrifice. It's this idea that without self-sacrificing, they're nothing, or that they can't heal, or that they're broken. Even though, someone who has mental illness or a diagnosis isn't broken, right? Can heal, can work on things. It can perpetuate a cycle that's pretty iffy. Any assumptions that are made on a level of violence, a level of criminal activity, that type of thing. I know some people had mentioned it at the beginning when we did that activity. Those are assumptions. Those are very negative stereotypes that affect a lot of people. This idea that you're violent, you're always going to hit someone, you can't control your emotions, you don't know what you're doing, even within characters within video games. And how they talk about those characters matters. Okay? Go ahead.
Can I actually ask that you move the mic a little closer to your mouth?
Yeah. Sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Thank you.
Yep. No worries. I appreciate you letting me know. All right. I'm going to move to the next slide. Oh, go ahead. Nope, you're good. Come on. All right, we're working with what we got. Go ahead. Ooh.
So, in your opinion, where does the level of suspension of disbelief from a player come from in aspects of tackling these tropes? Because with a character like the Joker, we've had so many adaptations. You've had the realistic Joaquin Phoenix one, but you've also had ones for Saturday morning cartoons where he's just outlandishly cartoonish to the point of
That's sedition, yeah.
Yeah. So how does that play into tackling these stereotypes and tropes?
I think it goes back, that's a good question. I think it goes back to this idea that we, as consumers of games, can still have compassion to the complexity of human beings as human beings, but also even characters who display behavior that might be true to who they are, but not like it. Does that make sense? You don't have to enjoy what characters do to understand the bigger conversation of awareness and respect for what other people face, or what and how the characters are and stories are depicted. Does that make sense? So I think it's a level of, you can be not happy with what someone does as a character. You can be not happy with what the developers do or how somebody writes the character, or happy with the character's actions, but still have a level of concern and compassion for people who may struggle with similar things, but still can be stigmatizing. For example, there are people who have diagnoses and mental illnesses that may display certain behaviors or certain tendencies, right? But that doesn't mean they're any less than as an individual. It means that they might need more support, they might need more compassion, more care, more resources, those type of things. So I think we have to be really careful not to get swept up into this idea of labeling and stigmatizing, but also be okay with understanding some aspects are, these are fictional characters, that is a little bit different than being a human, but also we don't have to be okay with everything that they do or how they're portrayed on every occasion. I hope that answers that question. Yes?
Do you think a positive example of mental illness portrayal, almost an incidental within the story, could include Remy from Ratatouille, who hears voices when he sees a picture of Cousteau?
Could be. Could be. There's accurate portrayals and healthy portrayals of that would cross over into what people would call psychosis, depending on your clinical opinion. But yeah, it could be. There's nothing particularly wrong with that depiction. Any other questions? I'm going to move on. Yeah. Do you want to come up here and ask it? Or you want to ask it from there?
No, I can ask it.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you think the more accurate the portrayal of whatever mental illness is portrayed, the better the storytelling, or
Mm-hmm.
do you think it's possible to, I guess, exaggerate or make something more mythical just to fit
I want to make sure I'm understanding your question right, because I don't want to assume. So are you asking me if I think it's okay if exaggerations happen to fit a certain story within gaming? I would say that I still, as a professional, would be very careful about that. If the exaggeration is done in a way that's with concern and compassion and respect for whatever it is that they are exaggerating within the story, and it can be a benefit to more people either learning or understanding the complexity within that character, I don't think it's completely wrong or bad or whatever. But I do think it is a kind of a step to where you still have to be careful and still have a level of awareness. And I'll talk about this later, but consultation with mental health professionals if you're going to do that correctly. Does that help answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go to the next slide so that we have time, but we'll keep going. So the games that I'm gonna show you, sorry, I know you asked me to speak closer to the mic. So the games I'm gonna show you are just a few. These ones, like I said earlier, are not games that are right. These are just games that have specific reasons as to why they're up there, and I'll put it that way, and I'll talk about it each one very quickly. So the first one, does anybody recognize it? Yes. That specific game was done in collaboration with, from left to right, just so you know which one I'm talking about, was done in collaboration with mental health professionals from the concept design all the way up to the story done. So there was a mental health panel that met with the developers when they're like, hey, we want to make this game. And they're like, hey, let's talk about, PTSD and trauma and this character and da-da-da-da-da. One second. From start to finish. I'm not saying it's always accurate. I'm not saying it's all, but that's just one example of something that developers did before they released the game to make it happen and have those conversations instilled before it was released to the general public. Yes?
What's the name of the game?
Y'all are going to fill in all my gaps. Thank you. The middle game is Celeste. If I'm saying it wrong, I'm sorry. That's just how it reads. Okay, cool. This is a game about a young woman, depending on how you see it, has anxiety, kind of is trying to get to the top of this mountain. Same kind of principle, met with mental health experts, but the difference is that they also met with people who had specific mental illnesses. So they met with people who had depression, anxiety, and learned from their experiences on how do we portray a game that we're trying to share with the general public that's talking about these things, that's showing them in a depiction. Somebody asked about depictions earlier, in a way that's not harmful. And so they did that for 6 months before leading up to beta testing for those specific players. The last one is Franbo. Has anybody played this one? Okay. Okay, so some familiar, some have played. I've also played this game as well. Same kind of concept. This is actually a Swedish game. It's from Swedish developers. And so they did a retreat. I'm not saying all developers need to do a retreat, but just telling you what they did. They did a retreat. They invited people who had all kinds of mental illnesses or diagnoses. They had mental health therapists available, and they sat and they took notes as they were sharing their story. The character, Fran, has complex trauma, really has a crappy way of destiny in terms of kind of the things that happened to her in the game. I'm not going to spoil it, but just kind of talking about some of the things that kind of happen. But even in the beginning, they thank the people that shared their experiences. They're part of the credit. All of those people are named at the end of the game, which is really awesome. They did this for a whole year before they even created, and tested it and submitted it out. So it's a really good game. I would encourage you. These are just a few. So these are just some attempts at being able to do things different, being able to include the consumer, us, the consumer, and I'm not talking about from a merchant standpoint, I'm talking about as the gamers or the people that are playing these games, to be able to be a part of the conversation. Okay? Any questions? Okay. I'm gonna see if anybody has any other games. I know we've been sharing throughout, but are there any other games that you all feel do that portray mental illness or concept of mental illness in a better way? I see two hands. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go up here.
I haven't played it yet, but Grizz apparently is really
What is it called?
Grizz.
Grizz?
R-I-S.
Grizz.
It's a really good depression game. They teach you how to deal with depression. You don't even like realize it.
Mhm.
It goes through it. I get to play it.
All right, so it's called Grizz. Talks about depression. It's a good representation, supposedly. I saw a hand in the back. I'll come back up this way in just a second. We'll do two more. Yes? You want to come up and share? Or you want to stand up and share? Whatever's more comfortable for you. Sorry. There you go.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Fun fact, I am a licensed social worker in a crisis.
Woo!
Wanted to do a similar
Same.
panel, but mine got rejected.
Oh, boo.
The ones I was hoping to focus on were
Yep.
my favorite game, period, is
Yep.
J.J. Macfield and the Island of Memories.
That's a good one.
It's like peak description of like, just exploration of like suicidality
Yep.
and gender dysphoria in its
Nice.
most like literal form.
That's awesome.
I love it.
That is a good one.
So is that one? Someone next to me pulled up Amori.
Oh, yep, also a
have-
good game.
I have thoughts.
Yeah.
Good, bad, and indifferent. I think it's pretty good on discussing like, pressure and fear and how phobias can register. I don't know how I feel about its take on like suicidality.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely up there, but like trauma and trauma bonding, that kind of thing.
For sure.
Like it becomes unhealthy, but it acknowledges it as such.
Yeah,
So it doesn't call it by its name, but it definitely acknowledges it as it is.
that's good.
Obviously, everyone's talked about Silent Hill to death.
Yep.
Silent Hill 2, come on. Yes, but also Silent Hill 2. It just came back out. But Persona 3 specifically as well.
Persona 3 is a
That was
good
one I
option.
wanted to talk about as part of it. Mostly of all the characters, Ken, Amada. Just having like that survivor guilt, being a child, not fully understanding the context in which like death came for his family, and how he sought death even though he was so young, and being old enough to understand the permanence of it.
Yeah,
So just there's a lot of good stuff out there, especially like with the updates and stuff that they've been having in like the 2010s onward.
great. Thank you.
I'll stop hogging the mic.
You're fine. Thank you. I'm just gonna leave that there. I'm gonna keep going because of time, but there'll be hopefully some time to talk more at the end. Okay? I see other hands raised. It's not that I want to shut you down. I'm actually listening and absorbing what you're telling me, but gotta keep going for time's sake. Okay? All right. So what are the impacts? The positive. This came out weird, so I'm just gonna read them in the way that they're. It says positive impacts. It encourages and fosters empathy and understanding. We're reducing stigma by talking about it and help asking for change and implementing change. Provides and validates people's experiences and increases opportunities and awareness. Some potential consequences of misrepresentation include reinforcing those harmful tropes that we talked about earlier. It can harm players, vulnerable communities. We end up losing out on the opportunities that could be better to improve games and improve experiences for others. And then the industry just continues to be stagnant in what it's doing already, right? Challenges for developers. Those include a lack of expertise. A developer is not a therapist. A developer is not a person who may understand what somebody goes through, right, on their own, or a team, or development studio. And so it can lead to a one-dimensional understanding of someone's experiences. There's this navigation between entertainment and budgeting and how do we make this real, right? How do we showcase the experiences of what somebody's going through? It's hard to create authentic experiences. I could say, I have anxiety, but somebody else could say, I have anxiety, and it's two different depictions on what that looks like. Who are they pleasing? They have people that they answer to. It might not be a game. It might not be something that they want to talk about. or maybe it's a backer, maybe it's whoever's giving them money, isn't something they care about or that they are passionate about, or that, bless you. You okay? Okay, just want to make sure. So on and so forth. There's a number of reasons. And sometimes it's just a general, maybe it's something that they want to do, but they have a lack of resources, funding, that type of thing. How do we change the narrative? We're learning about what's called the psychopathy spectrum and implementing it can be helpful. We'll look at what that looks like in just a second. Consulting, like I said, with mental health professionals, offer beta testing to people with lived experience, be open to feedback and actually implementing that feedback. Implementing accessibility features for people that have maybe specific diagnoses or specific reasons, or just different things that are going on with them. Have training, seminars, etc., where certain mental health diagnoses can be explored, as well as game design and game creation conversations can occur. These are just some ideas. There's a million more. Okay. So I'm not going to go into this in detail. If you have more questions about it, I'll be sticking around for a little bit at the end. But this is a video game psychopathy spectrum. It talks about kind of how developers look at creation of characters, storylines, etc. So when they have a general broad reference that's non-essential to a character storyline, or a character that's considered a one-dimensional approach to that implementation within a game. If they're looking at a defining element and it's, maybe surface level, the idea is just like general representation, that might mean that the storyline or the character is more two-dimensional and how they're portraying it or going to implement it. The place where we would love to see them be is that three-dimensional category, where they're not just defining element, but they have depth, and the character or the story has dimensionality in general that relates to those authentic experiences. Make sense? It's pretty straightforward. Key takeaways. While some progress has been made, like I mentioned before, there's more work to be done. As consumers of game, your own feedback for developers, creators, etc. is very crucial. So please give it in your reviews, in your comments, in your emails, however you do that. Effective portrayal of mental illness is crucial if we are to understand real and authentic experiences of people who go through it. And if we want to see it implemented in a better understanding within the characters and the things that we consume. Thanks. Thank you. This is my contact information. We have about 15 minutes left. So if there are people that have questions, you can come up to the mic. You're free to leave if you'd like, but I'm going to hang out for a little bit because we still have time within the panel. If you have questions, you can just come up and ask. We'll go from there. Hello.
Hello again.
How are you?
Smells good.
Thank you all. Have a good one. Yep.
We're losing everybody. So I find Celeste actually references this pretty well. If you could comment on external and internal locus of control when it comes to management of mental health. Sorry. I find Celeste handles internal locus of control very well, where they just, they're battling their mountain. They are learning how to deal with their anxiety and grow through that. But the mountain's still there. Right. But they just learn how to manage it. But I find clinically and also personally, I find there's a lot of external locus of control anticipation with mental health these days. There's a lot of the world needs to change for me, therefore I can manage this. Yep. If you could just comment on that.
Yeah, I think the concept of internal locus of control and outside locus of control it's hard, because I think essentially the internal aspect of it, whether it's you're a professional, whether it's a person who has a diagnosis or not, it's hard because internally, right, what they're thinking is how do I live with this every day? How do I function? What am I supposed to do? What are the resources that are available to me? And they might not have the ability to really know what they need right away. The external factor is dealing with how do people judge me on a daily basis? Does my right? It's those thoughts that are internal but are externally presented. How are people going to perceive my behavior? How are people gauging my actions? That type of thing. And I think it's hard because we as professionals have to be aware of those things more. We can't say, hey, people out there, we need you to do better and not do better ourselves. So I think it's a continuous conversation where we're not going to really know unless we're talking to people who are kind of going through it. And then we are externalizing that, and then we can ask for that change more effectively as professionals. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Hi.
I found your panel very insightful.
Thank you.
I'm a mental health counseling student working towards my LP.
Awesome.
And out of just curious,
Yep.
out of curiosity, I was
Yep.
just wondering what your theoretical orientation framework
Yeah, that's a good
is.
question. So I tend to be person focused first. Obviously, I'm a black, queer person, human. So I tend to be very social justice. I'm very feminist focused as well within my process and orientation, specifically going to bat for people who have vulnerabilities and are part of marginalized communities.
Yeah, and just following up with that, since you are like person-centered, do you
Yeah.
find any ways that you integrate some of your love of
Video games?
video games into your own work in a
I-
therapeutically
Yes,
appropriate manner?
Yes, that's a good question. I would encourage you to watch my other panel from last year to get more of an understanding of that. I use the concept of gamification within therapy. So the concept of gamification is actually utilizing board games and individual games within a therapeutic setting. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Not a problem. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, I enjoyed your panel.
Thank you.
So I guess I was just thinking about Fran Bow and
Yeah.
its portrayal of the, I don't know if it's been a while, I don't know if
You're fine.
it was called an asylum in the first part.
Yep. That you're exactly right.
So it was a very scary place.
Yes.
And recently I was in an inpatient program.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, it was it's a scary game, and
Yeah.
the portrayal of the asylum was scary.
Yeah.
But that's not a bad thing, right? Like, you can portray mental health as scary in a productive way.
Mental health's not easy. People who have mental health symptoms have scary moments. It is authentic in the sense of sometimes there's a fear that comes from being diagnosed or having to go to the hospital or having to be admitted and things like that. So I think Fran Bow does a great idea of depicting that, of showcasing what that looks like without doing damage to the character that is Fran Bow within her complex trauma. I think it honors her in a way that if you're playing the game, you kind of have to confront. So I don't think that's bad, no.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Hi.
Hello. Quick question,
Yeah.
just in case you happen to know about the game.
You're fine.
Are you familiar with Spiritfarer?
Yes.
Okay. I was curious on your what thoughts you might have regarding just like general like chronic and like acute mental illnesses and things that people go through in the game.
Yeah.
And then specifically the DLC with the hospital and the island and yeah.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious
um,
about your thoughts about that. It seems a little.
Yeah, in a short, very short, because I could talk about this for a long time. In a very short frame, I think it is one of those games that needs to do better. I understand why they portray people the way that they do, but I think it warrants a conversation and re-exploration as far as the overlooking and viewing. Seeing how they created the hospital and things, that's a little iffy to me. It doesn't resonate fully well with me. I think there's a lack of understanding in how to implement that and how to showcase that in a way that was meaningful for the gamer and the consumer.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks. Hi.
Hello. I have another question.
You're fine.
How do you feel about the portrayal of therapists and psychologists in media, specifically Harley Quinn, since I can tell you're a fan of DC?
So I'm a huge Harley Quinn fan. I cosplay her. I love her. I still very careful of how I talk about her and how I show compassion to what she's been through. Do I agree with all the things that she's gone through, that she does? No. So portrayal within media of therapists is wrong. It's not accurate at all, specifically BIPOC therapists and other marginalized groups, not portrayed well at all. We don't just sit on a couch. We don't generally we don't prescribe that type of stuff. So within Harley Quinn, without going into detail, I don't think that she should have had access to patients within an asylum. I think jumping into a vat of acid would probably kill you. And I do think that she has merit in terms of she is very smart, she is very capable, she obviously uses her degree even within situations that arise. But yeah, I mean, she got that degree, so she is still technically a psychologist. The way she's implemented it, it could be better. I hope that answered your question. I know that was very quick.
Yeah, as a quick follow-up,
Yep.
has there been a good example that you can possibly...
I like the new Poison Ivy with Poison Ivy right now, and the depictions that occur right now within the show.
I didn't mean about
I'm
Harley
sorry.
Quinn. I meant about
Oh.
a therapist or a psychologist.
I probably would say I'm very skeptical of how therapists, I'm just anti-therapist portrayal within media. Not because I don't think it's helpful. I get that they're actors, but I think it draws a line of needs to have a real person present to help train the actor who is portraying them, if that makes sense. So yes, there are improvements. If I was to think of a media that probably does it right, I think Chicago Med has a psychiatrist who portrays it sometimes well. I think 911 also at times has an attending psychiatrist that is portrayed semi-well. And then the other one is SVU. When they interview the children specifically, I think that that actress has done a good job with her portrayal as well. I hope that helps. I know that's not gaming, but media.
No, I was just curious about your opinion.
Yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, thank you again for doing this panel.
Of course, thank you. Sorry, I'm going through questions very quickly because of time.
Okay, I'll just be quick.
You're good.
Actually, as a developer, I come up here
Yeah.
wondering, again, how we communicate this to other people. You
Yeah.
said, again, doing better.
Yeah.
In today's current environment, we
Yep.
have many issues with,
Yep.
what I can only say is overcorrecting, where some instances
Yeah.
where some efforts are made, but
Yeah.
either fall short of the mark or end up being too blunt and heavy-handed and end up resulting in a backlash that actually does more harm than good. What would you suggest would be a good way to mitigate that, or again, the best way to approach that without risking that effect?
Good question. I think that the world we live in is broken. I think people are going to always have something to say. I don't think people should be afraid of backlash. The reason why I say it that way is because if you're doing something with the intent to improve and to do better, and you're making every step that you know how to do, whether as a developer, a professional, a consumer, whatever you are, that is good enough. In the sense of your best is all you can give. People are going to always have something to say. For me, the backlash, people will always have something to say. Now, in terms of big backlashes, we can't always control those things. But I think if it's a unified front of like, this is what we're doing, this is how we are going about this character, this game, this development, I think kind of standing together on a unified front is better to help navigate those muddy waters together so that, developers don't feel like they're on their own, or the studios don't feel like they're on their own. And then the people that you've been trying to, resonate with don't feel like they're on their own.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just asked a little extra side to that.
Yeah.
How do you respond then to occasionally, because we definitely see it,
Mhm.
where developers themselves may overreact, where they actively try to push away the criticism instead of trying to adapt to effectively address it, instead just simply say, well, you can just leave.
A lack of accountability is a lack of trust, and it's going to show within how your consumers believe and trust in your mission and statement. So if you're not willing to talk about it, people are going to pick up on it. I think that's a problem to ignore it and think it's going to go away.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah. Actually, if you don't mind, I'll just give you my card. I'd
Yes,
like to
thank you very
talk
much.
more about it later.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Thanks, guys.